Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food. And I do this by showing exactly what I've been up to in my own allotment and my own garden. Now this week it is another fun-packed episode coming up. We are really starting to turn our attention towards our brassicas at the moment, our winter vegetables, keeping the pigeons off our brassicas, but I've also got a bit of a book review coming up at the end. So, first of all, let's kick off with our seed of the month. Well, I'm here in my kitchen garden. It's a beautiful evening this evening, and I'm sitting out here because I'm starting to sow my kale. Now, kale for me is a fantastic crop. It's really nutritious. It came out as a superfood a few years ago, and that's when I first started hearing about it. But it's ultimately really productive, and if we sow it at the right time, it can go through the winter. It's really, really hardy. Now it's quite appropriate because at the moment where I'm sowing these seeds, above me I've got our neighbour's tree, and up there I know lives a couple of pigeons, and you might be able to hear them in the background just making a few noises. Pigeons are probably one of the biggest problems when it comes to brassicas, but never mind that, we'll talk about that down on the allotment. Now, what I've done to sow these seeds is I've filled up a tray of plug plant starters with seed sowing compost. Now, I like these trays. I like using plug plants because they're just a very easy way to grow a lot of plants quite quickly. And what I've done, I've filled it up with seed sowing compost, dipped a hole about 1/2 centimetre deep, and I'm just dropping a single seed in each single hole. One seed per plug plant is plenty. A whole tray, I mean, that's going to give us 48 plants, which is a lot. Probably more than what we actually need, but never mind that, because the more we have, the more we will plant. Now, I am sowing this now at the beginning of June. And what I find when we sow these seeds in June, July, is that is the perfect time to get them through the winter. If we sow in March to May, I find they're good for summer and autumn harvests, but I often find they're exhausted by the time we get to winter. If we sow in August, which we can still sow kale in August, believe it or not, but I often find that August, they're just not quite strong enough to get through the winter. Whereas June, July, and same with cabbages really, it's the perfect time to sow them for winter. Now, I reckon these will probably take a couple of weeks to germinate once these are completely sown. All we've got to do is make sure the compost stays moist, and we really need to protect them from the pigeons, because when they are young, when they start to grow, the pigeons will be there. Slugs and snails can also be a problem as well, but I think that's the problem with everything at the moment. Anyway, once they are 2 weeks until they germinate, they don't need any heat to germinate. They don't need any special care other than making sure the soil never dries out. But once they germinate, I will let them to grow on in my plug plants. Once the roots are coming out the bottom, that is when I will then pot them up into a bigger pot. We could actually pot them straight in the ground at this point, but I'm going to pot them up into a bigger pot, just to grow them on a little bit more, and then they will go into the ground wherever they are to grow. Now, when it comes to planting them in the ground, what I will do is actually dig a hole for the pot, or the root ball rather, and then scatter in some lime before planting. Now, lime adjusts the pH to make it more suitable for the brassicas, something I use a lot of on my brassicas. It's cheap enough to buy, it's natural, and it's just something I always use now. And just scatter it in, pop in the plant, backfill and water, and it should grow quite happily. After that, it's fairly easy to look after. We've just got to make sure they keep well watered, especially if it is in dry spells. It might be worth applying an organic feed, maybe something like chicken manure pellets, something with high nitrogen for leafy growth. And then as they grow, one of the things we've also got to keep an eye on is pests. Now, there's not a huge amount of pests. Kale is quite hardy, but it is not pest proof. Cabbage white butterflies are the obvious one, and we can stop that by using a mesh or netting to stop them from laying their eggs. Flea beetles can be another little problem. Again, fine mesh will stop that. Slugs can be a problem, pigeons can be a problem. All these sort of things, they can be a problem. But to be honest, I find the best way, encourage nature to look after the plants, as you know. I should say, actually, I give about 45 centimetres of space between each plant depending on the variety. Now that is quite a bit of space because kale is quite a big plant, but it's also similar to what we might use in the way of Brussels sprouts and other brassicas. So it's not unusual to use that much space, but it's certainly quite a big plant, quite a bit of space. There are dwarf varieties that need less space, but 45 centimetres is still what I tend to go for. Now, when the leaves are about 10 to 15 centimetres long, depending on the variety again, that's when we can start picking. This is usually around about 2 months after, so these will probably be ready beginning of August. And I like to pick them from the bottom and work my way up, just picking a leaf at a time as and when we need it. Now, it's not a good idea, unless you want to get rid of the plant, of course, to strip all the leaves off your kale plant. That's why I like to grow quite a few plants, so I can pick a few leaves off one plant and a few leaves of another and spread it out, and that way the rest of the plants will grow quite nicely. Now, one of the things that I do recommend, there are quite a few varieties. There's curly kale, which is a green curled variety. It's very reliable, very compact, but very cold hardy as well. There's Cavallo Nero, or Nero Di Toscona, which I think is an Italian version. It's also known as black kale, and it's got these really long, elegant leaves packed full of flavour and absolutely beautiful. And then there's a red Russian as well, which has got quite an attractive look and tender, frilly edges too. So 3 varieties. There are of course links to Premier Seeds Direct for these should you want them as well. Now, before I head down to the allotment, what else have we been having going on here in the kitchen garden? Well, we've continued planting out more plants. I have realised that a lot of the root crops that I sowed a few weeks ago in the root bed didn't germinate. Now, this could be a wide variety of reasons. I think it's because it just didn't get enough water. They did germinate, so I've decided I'm going to fill that bed up with some of my other plants, my chilies, tomatoes and things like that. Bit of a multi-use bed. But what I've also done is I've sown these seeds, my carrots, turnips, kohlrabi, radish, spring onions. I've sown those in my veggie pod. The veggie pod does seem to work quite well for germination and does tend to look after the plants and the seedlings really, really well. So we've sown those in there. They will stay watered and I'm quite happy with that. I've also planted up the straw bale garden. Now, I've been using straw bales or setting up the straw bales, but we pot in a couple of pumpkins and squash plants in those straw bales and hopefully they're going to grow quite successfully this year. So basically it's all full on go here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. As I said, it is time now. Head down to the allotment and find out what's going on down there. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, I'm just going to interrupt this podcast quickly and ask if you are enjoying this podcast, then please rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it really does mean the world to us, and it helps us get found by more people who might be interested in learning how to grow more of their own food. Not only that, if you are enjoying this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do and keep everything running, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. For just £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you a bit more of an idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. Also, added to that, once a month you receive our seed pack, and this comes through your letterbox. In that seed pack, you get a collection of seeds that are designed to be sown in that very month. You also get a copy of our mini newspaper. Now, these are all carefully curated by me to try and feed ourselves all year round. So I personally think it is an absolute bargain for just £5 a month. Now, I've just sent out June's seeds, and June's is quite a bumper collection. We've got some borlotti beans, we've got some kale seeds, we've got some radicchio seeds, we've got some Swiss chard seeds, we've got some Mizuna seeds and parsley seeds. So that gives you an idea of what you could receive if you become a member for just £5 a month. If that sounds like something you would be interested in, then please head to theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more and sign up. Right, back to the garden. Well, I'm here on the allotment for the final visit in May because, of course, this is the final weekend in May. By the time this podcast comes out, it will actually be June. But never mind that. Anyway, what we're doing down here today, so I've given the potatoes a final mulch with straw. Now this is a big improvement because we've really gone all out on the straw. It's saved us a fortune, I have to say, and it's filled up my rather large corrugated iron beds with straw. But most of all, what I'm noticing is the potato plants themselves are looking really, really good. So my first earlies, they are looking really flush and lush growth on the foliage, although no flowers yet. The second earlies, we've noticed a single flower on one of the plants, so that's a good sign that they are nearly ready. But the main crops, they are all flowering. Now, this to me is the wrong way round. The reason I say that is that we normally work out when our potatoes are ready, particularly first earlies and the second earlies, by the flowers. So the first earlies are generally ready when the flowers start to appear. The second earlies are ready when the flowers have finished flowering, and the main crops, they are ready when the foliage dies down. So that won't be for a while yet. But to see flowers, although the wrong way round, is an encouraging sign. We've just got to hope now that the first earlies are going to flower in the next couple of weeks, and then we can start harvesting some of those. I've also noticed that some of the plants that I've sown the seeds directly in the soil, my runner beans, my French beans, my carrots and my parsnips, they seem to have failed to germinate. Now I put this down to the fact that the soil has been pretty dry, despite me trying to water them regularly. Little annoying to say the least. We have got some parsnips, to be fair, but very sparingly germinated. So this is a bit of a lesson for me, to be honest. I've always struggled to sow seeds directly here on the allotment anyway. The hard clay soil and the couch grass do swamp things out. And this is kind of why I don't normally sow seeds direct anyway. But it is what it is. We will have to make the most of it. The bean seeds that we've sown at home, they're going to have to come down here and be planted into the same bed. Pea seeds have germinated, to be fair. Carrots, however, that's a difficult one. We could sow some at home, but carrots generally do not like being transplanted. This is why I don't like buying them from a garden centre. So we're going to have to rethink what we're going to do for carrots. Luckily, I do have carrots that I've sown at home in a veggie pot. So it's not the end of the world. And in fact, now I think about it, I mentioned earlier that root crops at home have failed to germinate as well. So definitely something going on this year with those sort of seeds. It's definitely not the seeds because I always use fresh seeds. Now, one of the biggest things that I've noticed this week is last week I planted out some of my brassicas, the Brussels sprouts and things like that. This week I've actually followed that on with some more cauliflowers and cabbages just to fill up the beds quite nicely. What I've noticed, rather interestingly, is that the plants that I planted out last week have been eaten, I suspect, by pigeons. Now, not completely eaten, just nibbled, I guess would be a better way. I think at the moment there's plenty of food around for pigeons, so they're not dedicating themselves to my brassicas. But pigeons are a bane of many gardeners' life. I know a lot of people do struggle with pigeons eating their cabbages and other brassicas. And this has led me down the road of what can we do about it. And what I've done today is I've just got my net tunnels out of my shed and pop them over my newly planted brassicas and the Brussels sprouts that we planted last week and things like that. Now, I'm not a fan of using nets, I'm going to be honest with you. I bought them years and years ago and they are starting to deteriorate. But I'm not a fan of using nets. They're fine when the plants are young, but what I find is that, yes, they're good at keeping pigeons off our brassicas and cabbage white butterflies for that. But what they don't do is let in the smaller birds, the thrushes, that can eat some of the pests that we have on there anyway. Added to that, I also find that when I place nets over my plants, I then pot off weeding in them because it's a barrier to stop me from getting in there and weed them. So I'm in two minds about what to do. I could build some more nets, which would be a nice little project. In the past, I've sprayed all the plants with grazers specifically for pigeons and deer. That actually did work very, very well. And that might be what I do next week. I bring down some of that, add it to a watering can and spray it on. It's a natural product. It doesn't hurt anything. It just deters anything from eating my plants. So that is probably the route I'm going to go down. Another thing that we could, of course, always do as well is a scarecrow. Now, everybody loves a scarecrow, isn't it? I haven't built a scarecrow down on the allotment for a while. I've got one at home, and he stands proud sitting in my brassica patch keeping an eye, and I don't actually have any nets over my brassicas, so a scarecrow is possibly a good way forward. A little bit of work involved, and it takes me away from other things. This is one of the things that I don't like doing, is I like to do things simply and effective, and I think this is where grazers for me has been such a good thing, because we just pour it into our watering can and use it while watering. But scarecrow is a good addition as well. For me, three things have worked at keeping pigeons off, but they all have negative and positive effects. I'd love to know what you do to keep your pigeons off. Now, everything else on the allotment is coming together quite nicely. We've got quite a few weeds that we're removing. We've planted up lots of plants, and including our straw bale gardening. Now, the straw bales, I've put into there some pumpkins and courgettes, as well as a few peppers and things like that. That seems to be working really, really well at the moment. This is quite new, of course. I'm hoping it's all going to rot down and turn into compost. Fingers crossed it will. But mostly the plants that are in there are doing really, really well. Right, I think it is now time to head on home and talk about the book that I've been reading. So I'll meet you back in the podding shed. In the meantime, let's find out what Chef Scott has for us this week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here with this week's recipe. And this week we have another rhubarb recipe. And rhubarb is one of my favourite plants to grow because it's so versatile. And this is evident with a number of recipes that I have already shared. Things like rhubarb barbecue sauce, cordial, crumble, rhubarb fool, and even an Indian-style rhubarb pickle, and much, much more, all available on the veggrowpodcast.co.uk. And it's to India that I turn again for this week's recipe, a rhubarb and red lentil dal. Rhubarb is surprisingly used quite a lot in Indian cookery, and often in place of tomatoes to add acidity to dishes, and it also deals well with spices. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the veggrowpodcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, See2Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need 380 grams of red lentils, 1,100 millilitres of water, 140 grams of diced white onion, 3 cloves of garlic crushed, 30 grams of chopped ginger, 30 grams of butter, 1 whole red chilli, 2 teaspoons of coriander seeds, 1 clove, 2 teaspoons of cumin seeds, 1 teaspoon of mustard seeds, 150 grams of chopped rhubarb, 20 grams of garam masala, and 50 grams of curry powder. Method: start by sweating off the onions, garlic and ginger in the butter until golden brown. Then add the chilli, cumin seeds, coriander seeds, clove and mustard seeds, followed by the rhubarb, and continue to cook for 2 minutes. Now add the water, garam masala and curry powder, and bring to a boil, then cover with a lid and reduce to a simmer, and cook for 20 to 30 minutes, or until the lentils are tender. Now season with salt and pepper and serve. And that's the recipe done, and that's it from me this week.
Well, I'm in the podding shed now, and I just want to finish off tonight with, well, firstly, the book review. Now, I've been reading Chas and His Rock and Roll Allotment, and I actually picked this book up 6-7 weeks ago, beginning of April, but not that I forgot to mention it, it just seemed like I had to read this a good couple of times because I really, really enjoyed this book. It's not a particularly big book, I've got to say. The premise is Chas, who is one half of Chas and Dave, the singers, the band, back in, well, before I was born. He took on an allotment and he's been growing his own food in it. And it has been an absolute pleasure in this book. It's quite humorous. There's a lot of laughs and jokes about this book, but it's also very educational at the same time. He's listed things like hoes, a Dutch hoe. I'll read you this bit actually. A Dutch hoe. This is your next most important tool. I carry mine around with me all the time when I'm on the allotment. Keep the hoe going at all times between the rows you've sown, skimming it across the top of the soil and chopping the heads of anything you don't want coming up. It's a most pleasant thing to do, even hoe when you can't see growth, because it will help stop it starting. It's strange that a weak person is called a weed. Ignore one and it will take over your garden. You know, it just little things like that have made this book really quite enjoyable. And what I found, again, it's very much a journal, very much of his journey growing food on an allotment or growing an allotment. There are snippets of how to grow certain vegetables or what he's learned, but it's from very much his experience. He's mentioned onions and he grew them from sets. He grew them over winter like we would do, planted them out in March, and then somebody told him that they wouldn't store very well, but that wasn't what he found. And this is very much a lot of things I have with many people who grow their own food. What we're told is not always the case. So I really enjoyed this book. It was a good laugh. It was an easy read as well, but I did have to read it a couple of times because I did enjoy it so much. Chas and His Rock and Roll Allotment. There will be a link in the show notes if you are interested. Now, if anybody has a suggestion for another book that I can read throughout June, then please do share your thoughts. It would be great to get another book. I do like getting your recommendations at the moment because, well, what I look at may be completely different to what you read yourselves. As always, I'm going to ask you to please rate and review this podcast on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us and it helps us get found by people who might also be interested in growing their own food. I've had a couple of reviews on Spotify again, and the first one comes from Natalie. Natalie has been on the podcast before. I've met her in person as well. She says, "Hi Richard, great show as always. I have half a plot and still can't make enough compost. I bring scraps from home and add weeds too. I dry out bindweed and dandelions first. I have a question. I like strelch. If I remember rightly, you don't like the smell. I use it under my strawberries and other perennial veg. However, does it bring enough goodness and conditioning to the soil, or should I add garden compost as a mulch conditioner first? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, Natalie." Now, for those that don't know, strelch is a mineralised straw. It's actually very, very good, I've got to say. I used it a couple of years ago. I bought a bag and it covered 2 of my beds on the allotment. And it grew some of the best onions I've ever grown in those beds. So I do think there's plenty of nutrients added to it. I would still add compost first and then cover it over with strelch, because compost is also adding organic matter and getting the worms working. The strelch will do the same, just at a much slower rate. I did say at the time I didn't like the smell. It wasn't that I didn't like the smell, it's that I wouldn't find the smell appropriate in a home garden, right outside your kitchen door, and you get this sort of farmyard smell. That's what I didn't think was good about it. But on an allotment or away from your back door, I think it is the perfect mulch, or one of the best mulches, I have to say. The only other downside I had is the cost. I think I've seen that a bag of strolch costs something around £20. It does last a good year, so it is a good investment at the same time, but I just feel for me it's too much. It would cost over £100 to do my allotment, and that's why I don't really use it. But it is good. It is very, very good. Now, I've also got another review from Lynn. Lynn says, "Hi Richard, fab podcast because you talked about chickens. I have kept them for 30 years and I have between 10 and 15. A mixture of pure breeds and hybrids. Favourites are cream leg bars, lay blue eggs. My biggest tip, don't use wooden coop. Red spider mites are so hard to control. I use a lovely dome-shaped coop made of recycled plastic, delivered already made up. Cost effective, and after 6 years, still looks like new. I can't live without my chickens either, Lynn." That's a lot of chickens. I've only got 4, but I wouldn't be without chickens. They're fantastic in the garden. I'm thinking about actually getting some chickens on the allotment to help with a wide variety of things. But yeah, I do love having chickens. I've got to admit, I've got a plastic coop as well, and it was one of the best investments we've ever made for chickens. I did originally have a wooden coop, but the spider mite became a bit of a problem. But going to plastic, much easier to clean. I know plastic is a bit of a dirty word in the garden, but it's much easier to clean. You don't get as many problems with spider mite and other bugs, and the chickens do seem happier in it as well. So yeah, another good vote. I've got the omelette igloo that I use. Again, links will be in the show notes. Right, well, with that, it's time to wrap this up. So please do consider becoming a member of our supporters club. It genuinely helps keep this podcast running. If you want to get in touch, then please do. You can either leave a comment on our website at veggroundpodcast.co.uk. You can also leave a voicemail on our website, or you can email me, richard@veggroundpodcast.co.uk. You can, of course, find me on social media. I'm on pretty much every platform. But until next time, please take care.